Chapter 12. Hunger Pains. Thorax had been hoping for a clear window to take Twilight to the border within a few days. Things had been pretty relaxed for a while, relatively speaking, so it had made sense to him that he could find a window to request a few days of personal leave to rest himself up. The excuse that he had overdone it a little with the scouting runs and thus needed to recover would probably be satisfactory for Pharynx, and would not seem at all out of character for him to the other drones in the hive. Alas, Mother Nature had other plans. Thorax grimaced when a blast of thunder filled the air, heavily muffled by the stone walls of the hive. A few other drones nearby glanced up for a moment before going back to their prior conversation. Thick storm clouds had rolled in from the east, blanketing a large region of the Badlands in darkness. Lightning struck frequently, filling the typically quiet wasteland with an irregularly recurring cacophony. No rain had fallen, yet, but given how recent the last major rainfall had been, it wasn't out of the question. And if rain did start falling, it would be all hooves on deck until it ended. Weaker drones around the hive would be tasked with salvaging whatever water they could, while soldiers and warriors would make forays into the broken wasteland to ensure their prey wasn't snatched away from them by angered tatzelworms or other such beasts driven mad by the flooding of their underground burrows. There was also the matter of Twilight. As powerful as she was with magic, she was still woefully unprepared to handle herself against the worst of the Badlands could throw at her in weather like that. She had barely survived her encounter with the tatzelworms the first time, and had been severely wounded in the process. Her odds would be better now, thanks to her cave and her growing familiarity with the land, but her lack of sustenance meant she was steadily growing weaker with time. "Hey!" Thorax all but jumped out of his shell when Scorpion's voice carved through the air. He spun on his hooves to find the other drone marching up to him with an impatient scowl. "You're late for assignment, whelp, and Pharynx insists you be there." He spat before turning his nose up in a sign of distaste for the head of patrol. "Send me to find and drag your sorry shell back to the warrior's nest." Thorax quickly stood at attention, mentally berating himself for losing track of time. "Sorry, I'm on my way." Scorpion snorted. "Uh-huh. What are you doing all the way down here anyway? What, you hiding from your job or something?" Thorax quickly shook his head. No, I have a lot on my mind, that's all. I was taking a walk to clear my head," he said, not technically lying. Scorpion did not seem impressed. He scoffed and shoved Thorax towards the nearest wall just as it opened with a spine-chilling scrape. "Yeah, whatever. Just gonna move on. Worthless grub." Thorax managed to keep his hooves under him, awkwardly turning his stumble into a brisk trot through the churning corridors of the hive. Scorpion kept close behind him all the way, sending a chill down Thorax's spine. The two eventually came out of the wall of the warrior's nest, some ways up, already seeing most of the drones assembled and in position. One or two risked a glance towards them as they arrived, their glares boring into Thorax specifically. Pharynx stood at the head of the pack, staring up at Thorax with a subtle, disapproving look. "Thorax, there you are," he called out once Thorax and Scorpion touched down. "The stupid kid was down in the lower tunnels," Scorpion declared with an impatient snarl. "Dunno why you wanted me to drag a sorry flank all the way back here." "Watch your tongue, Scorpion," Pharynx warned, "and get back in line. Thorax, find a spot." Scorpion growled under his breath almost inaudibly, before turning and making his way to an empty spot in the back of the group. Thorax picked a spot on the opposite end, quickly standing at attention and awaiting his orders. Pharynx gave his sage nod before starting to pace in front of his troops. "All right, listen up, all of you," he barked, his voice sharp and commanding to ensure all were paying attention. "In case any of you have had your heads rammed up a rock's rump these last few days, dense storm clouds have recently come in to cover the Badlands. We had expected them to pass the morning after their arrival, but it seems our weather scouts made a mistake in their observations. The clouds are sticking around for a few more days at least, and I am not going to take any chances. If rain starts pouring, I'm going to need all of you ready to go at a moment's notice, and I'm stepping up patrols in the meantime just in case. A few quiet groans passed through the gathered troops, no doubt from drones who had managed to procure some personal leave beforehand. Pharynx narrowed his eyes. I heard that! Take your job seriously, you lot. This is one of the most important jobs in the hive, and I don't want to hear any of you grumbling like freshly molted nymphs being put to rest in the nursery. We're warriors. It's our job to defend this hive, and we're going to do it with pride. Now. Pharynx's eyes fell on Thorax. Thorax, you've been going on lone scouting runs for a while now, and your physique has visibly improved. Time to see if it's all paid off. I want you to keep a closer eye on the sky while you're on patrol today, as well as animal activity. The thunder is sure to have stirred some trouble, and I need you to be on the lookout for anything that might pose a threat or disrupt our food supply. Be meticulous. Thorax nodded his head. Yes, sir. Maybe you should send someone with him, sir? Another drone, a female named Spiracle, suggested from the heart of the pack. I've seen his physical improvement, but we all saw how quickly he surrendered when Scorpion and Mandible ganged up on him a few days ago. Thorax's ears drooped, and his face fell at the reminder of his shameful lack of resolve in the face of those two drones. You had to bring it up! Scorpion's voice complained from the back. Thorax did manage to get a tiny ghost of a smile at hearing the other drone's indignation at being called out. Pharynx snarled. Shut it, Scorpion! You're lucky you got off as easy as you did. Now then, Spiracle. He turned back to the female that spoke out. As valid as your point is, the whole reason Thorax is going on lone scouting missions is to build up his confidence and strength. Sending a drone to baby him will only slow him down in that regard. He's not supposed to engage anything he finds, only observe it and report back to me. Understood, sir, Spiracle replied before going quiet. Pharynx nodded. Good. Now then. Thorax only half listened as Pharynx then dished out orders. It didn't take long, but soon enough, everyone had a task. Satisfied, Pharynx held his head high and spread out his wings. Right. That will be all. You're dismissed. The warriors' nest erupted into a flurry of activity. All of the drones sprang into the air, their wings carrying them up for a nearby wall. Thorax followed after them, passing through the newly formed hole. Soon enough, the swarm came out of the hive and spread out to carry out their various tasks. Try not to squeal too loud when the lightning strikes, Thorax. Scorpion's voice cackled at him over the intense buzzing of wings in the air. Thorax flinched and looked away. He took a deep breath, trying to ignore the burning sensation in the base of his skull as well as he could. After a second, once he was sure the insulting bug was out of earshot, Thorax turned his eyes back to the swarm with a disdainful glare. Yeah? Try not to squeal too loud next time Pharynx catches you acting out of line, he growled under his breath. At the moment, the near-silent counter had felt good. But as Thorax made his way for Twilight, battered on all sides by the stronger-than-usual winds that were whipping across his homeland, he couldn't deny a small feeling of shame and regret forming in the pits of his stomach. He was supposed to be better than that, wasn't he? He shouldn't allow himself to fall to their level. Of course, who was he to think he was any better than Scorpion or Mandible? They weren't the ones who had stolen from the hive's food storage, after all. He was so lost in his own thoughts that he barely noticed when he came to a landing outside of Twilight's cave. Thorax, there you are! Twilight's cheerful voice called out to him. snapping him out of his trance. He blinked and looked up to see her coming around the bend with a tender smile.
I was starting to get worried that you might not show up today.
Thorax put on a weak smile as he stepped forward.
Sorry. Pharynx called a big meeting in the Warrior's Nest because of the storm,
he explained, gesturing back at the sky.
If it starts raining, I'm probably gonna go missing for a few days, at least. Pharynx will need all hooves on deck to help patrol the desert.
Twilight nodded in understanding, trotting beside him as he came inside.
I understand. Although...
She grimaced with an uncomfortable look on her face.
I guess that means we won't be heading for Equestrian until then, huh?
Thorax sighed and shook his head.
Sorry, but no. I need a window where nothing is expected of me, and that's not happening for a little while.
Twilight fell silent. Thorax turned to her, his eyes adjusting to see her aura. He blinked in surprise when he saw several shades of fiery orange drifting off of her in thick waves, the telltale color of frustration and impatience.
God dang it!
Twilight vented, stomping a hoof against the ground.
I get myself all excited to go home in the next day or two, and then suddenly there's a big storm, and my trip gets delayed.
Thorax flinched back, lowering his head.
I'm sorry, Twilight,
Twilight froze on hearing his mumbled apology. She quickly turned to him, her aura flickering from frustration to regret and a heartbeat.
No, I wasn't blaming you, Thorax. I know the weather isn't your fault,
she said quickly, putting a hoof on his shoulder.
I'm sure you're doing everything you can.
Thorax was quiet for a second before nodding and offering her a warm smile.
Right, I am. I just wish I could do more,
he muttered. Twilight sighed and pulled back, her aura dulling with what could only be described as defeat.
I really want to get home,
she said softly, sitting down against the wall in front of her campfire.
I know this is your home and all, and I don't want to be offensive, but I hate it here. All of this sand, the angry animals, the heat, the stomach rot. I just want to go back to my friends and my library and sleep in my own bed instead of a cobbled-together bedroll.
An audible growl filled the cave as her stomach voiced its displeasure, making Twilight grimace. She cradled her belly and shot Thorax a sheepish look.
And, I know you've brought me some decent meals here and there, but I would also really like to have a big, good meal for a change. The food here works, but it's never a hayburger.
Thorax trotted over to sit down across the fire from her, his face falling as his mind wandered. As irrational as it was, he couldn't shake a small sense of regret at having to delay her return to Equestria like this. And now he could see that her situation was really starting to eat away at her nerves. It was clear in her aura how the waves and curtains of color were frayed at the edges, like an old cloth that had been left out for too long. But what could he do about it? Twilight was miles from home with almost no contact with the pony she held dear, the only exception being the now dust-covered letter sent to her by Spike. Having that reminder of her friend's concern laying around was no doubt adding to her stress, pressuring her to get home as fast as possible and spare her friends the pain of worrying over her.
Wait,
he thought to himself after a second, his eyes widening. After a moment, he cleared his throat and spoke up.
So you're hungry, huh?
Twilight nodded her head.
All the time. Kind of like you, I guess, but...
She sighed and let her hooves fall back to the floor.
I know how to make my hunger go away for a while. Actually managing to pull that off is what's vexing me, though. There just isn't enough food around here, even with the donations you bring me sometimes.
Thorax swallowed a lump that had suddenly formed in his throat, his mind drifting to the food stores he had previously stolen from. An idea began to take shape in his head. A stupid, foolish plan that would be breaking the promise he had made to himself. Twilight was hungry, yes, but she wasn't in any danger of starvation. She'd be fine, as she was for now. Fine. But not happy. Thorax's heart plummeted when Twilight's stomach gurgled at her again, making her groan in annoyance at the unwelcome sound. She reached out and picked up Spike's letter again, giving it a read before setting it down and burying her face in her hooves. She was probably trying to think of some way to reply to him, to let him know that she was all right. The sad sight stirred Thorax's heart, and every ounce of concern he held for the unicorn in front of him was now screaming that he'd do something to ease her discomfort and bring a smile back to her lips. It was just such a shame that the only way to do that meant going back on his word.
This will be the last time,
he told himself with finality, subtly nodding to himself before speaking out loud.
Well, how about I bring you a nice big meal next time I come to visit?
He suggested in a friendly voice. Twilight blinked and glanced up at him.
Huh?
Thorax gestured out of the cave.
I brought you some food for my first few visits. What if I brought you a bigger one? You know, something big enough to quiet down that stomach of yours for a while. Maybe make a nice big salad, maybe some soup. Maybe I could even try my hoof at making those hayburger things you keep talking about.
Twilight studied him for a moment. Thorax maintained his smile, though inwardly he was starting to shrivel up into an anxious ball of concern. Could she tell that something about this plan was upsetting him? If she did, she elected not to comment on it. She smiled.
Well, just as long as it isn't too much trouble for you. I know how hard it can be to find food out here, even if you know where and when to look.
She eventually agreed.
I just don't want you to run yourself ragged on my account.
Thorax shook his head.
Oh, don't worry,
he said with fake confidence.
It's no problem at all. It'll be the biggest meal I've ever brought you. Enough for leftovers. Assuming I don't eat the leftovers while you're gone again.
Twilight chuckled. Thorax snorted at the reminder.
No, you ate the leftovers before I even left. Oh, hush.
Twilight shot back, before the two broke down into a fit of amused giggles, enjoying the company of the other as thunder boomed outside.